and welcome to the Real Biz Life Chronicles, where we discuss all things business, branding, and life. I'm your host, Tracy Fryer. Now, today, my guest is an avid shoe fan and a Chihuahua mama, just like myself. But more importantly, she's a leading female motivational speaker who is helping leaders drop the act and make a bigger impact. Dr. Katherine Iscoe, welcome.
Thanks for having me here. I'm so excited. Fellow shoe lover, fellow Chihuahua lover. I'm already in heaven.
Definitely a match made in heaven, I agree.
Totally.
Oh, Dr. Katherine, I'd love for you to walk us through. Please give us an insight into your journey. How does one land up as a leading motivational speaker?
Making a lot of mistakes, a heck of a lot of mistakes. And I don't think I'm saying anything new here, but obviously we learn a heck of a lot more through mistakes. Do we learn from repetition? Absolutely. But I think the trajectory and how quickly you can learn from mistakes is definitely valuable. But the problem is how we feel while we're making those mistakes. And I often find that if you don't have control of your mindset, when you make a mistake, you feel like a mistake. Just like when you say something stupid, you don't think, oh, I've said something stupid. You equate saying something stupid with being stupid. So we conflate the two. So I think this has been one of my biggest learning journeys is that it's the yucky parts of life that actually eventually make life a heck of a lot easier, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And Dr. Katherine, where did your career start?
Where did it start? That's an interesting question because I think it started in like 300 different places, like from, being the weirdo at school to dropping out of university to be a full-time pastry chef at what was then, the 90s in Toronto when it was all about like cocaine and fast, stuff. And then to eating disorders, to major depression, to suicidal ideation, to dropping out of school to be a real estate agent, even though, God, that was horrible. And everything that you can think of, it's kind of like the way I describe how I have come to where I am now is kind of like when my mom makes a soup. And this sound crazy, but like when my mom wants to make a soup, she's just like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And let me take some leftovers and then, let me see what I have in the freezer. And you put it all into a pot, you mix it. And somehow it just always works out.
Yeah.
And I think this is, it's the complexities that make us so interesting. That's what I think.
And I guess along that journey, it sounds like you've had, a lot of key moments. Is that what led you to kind of step into this space and inspire others?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we hide so much from the shame that we experience in life because we feel like we're the only ones that went through that. So I'll give you an example. When I was in university, this was during my master's degree. I was living with my best friend at the time, and as a perfectionist, high achieving people pleaser, it was all about what do people think of me and how can I be as perfect as possible. The problem with that, especially when you have body image issues, is perfection turns into basically punishment. And so I went from trying to eat as little as possible, which I couldn't sustain because I love food, to bulimia and binge eating. And I thought, again, this is prior to social media, prior to knowing that I wasn't the only weirdo out there, but I felt like that. I felt like a weirdo, and I just couldn't hold it in any longer. I was like, I need to tell someone because the stuff that was going on in my head was very, very scary. And so one day I said to Sarah, like, I got to tell you something. And I was so nervous. To reveal the secret. And I said, Sarah, I binge eat, especially when I'm stressed. And I was thinking, catastrophizing in my mind that she was going, I never want to be friends with you again. And you're crazy. Like, let me take you to the loony bin. And what she said was, oh my God, I do that too.
Oh, wow.
And
yeah.
the way I describe it is like, when you have to fart really, really badly, but you can't, you have to hold it in, hold it in, hold it in, hold it in, and eventually you let it out and you're like, this is the best feeling I've ever experienced in my life. That
100%.
was it. It was like I had these thoughts that were putting so much pressure on my head and making me feel
Mm.
so incredibly uncomfortable. And then all of
Mm.
a sudden, you find someone that you can fart in front of it. And I
Yeah.
call them my fart friends. The fart friends are the ones that you can be your true self, be as
Mm.
vulnerable, as weird, as gross as you could possibly be. And they're like, yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah.
And it just normalizes the situation.
Yeah.
So I think that's an example of, I think, how powerful that can be, and then especially when it comes to leadership, is
Mm.
oftentimes we look at leadership as they must be perfect all the time, but that's not attainable. And the
Mm-mm.
more perfect you are in someone's eyes, I think the less trustworthy they are because there's got to be something wrong with you, right? So the more you can
Totally.
reveal about yourself, the more connected you can be.
Yeah, and just sort of adding that human element as well.
Mhm. Mhm. The humble human.
Yes. And, Dr. Catherine, being a recovering perfectionist myself, if someone is holding in a fart, what would you recommend? I'm just thinking how painful that is, but never mind. What would you recommend those sort of like next steps are? Because again, and I can speak from experience, we get so consumed by our own thoughts and we ruminate and almost drive ourselves stark raving mad. What would be the first steps you'd recommend that that person takes?
Ooh. So I think finding out why you are a perfectionist in the first place, like that's
Mm.
perhaps a question that you can have just in the back of your mind at all times, like looking out for patterns. When are you stressing out about being perfect? For example, when you're writing an email, do you stress about being writing that perfect email to a certain kind of person, or is it with
Mm.
everyone? Because I think especially when it comes to perfectionism and people pleasing, we do it for 3 different reasons. We either wanna fit in, we want to avoid criticism, or we just want approval because we have lacked validation. So it's likely one of those 3 reasons, on the fearing conflict, for example. Like, let's say, you're writing an email to a client and maybe it's a very direct email. You want it to be
Mm.
perfect because you don't want that person to be mad at you. So is that the reason why you're writing a perfect email, or what's
Mm.
the reason for it? It really crops up in the most insidious ways. And I find, especially when I'm writing a message, I will reread that message over and over and over again when it's the most benign, basic email. And so that's something that I
Mm.
practice over the years is I actually just sent a message to someone that I'm just meeting for the first time. And I said to myself, write it, send it. Because
Yeah.
life is way too short to spend your entire life editing a friggin' email. It's
Mm.
ridiculous.
It
Ridiculous.
is. Completely. We do, however, get those if you make a typo. They love to announce it that you've made a typo. How do you handle that?
I said, I'm like, I made a typo. I haven't killed a nun. If
No,
I've killed
no.
a nun, you can judge me. It's a typo. And I think it's amazing when you see the other side of the life, like the other perspective, because
Mm.
from those perfectionistic views, you're like, this is the only way to live. And then when you go out of it, it's like, what was I thinking? It was kind of like,
Mm.
when I used to diet, I could only have skim milk. I could only have egg white. And I thought it was quote unquote delicious, right? Like,
Yeah.
fat free cheese, fat free.
Mm.
And now when I have like even a bite of like an egg white omelet, I vomit. And
Mm.
I just think, how could I have ever been that way when there's so many delicious foods out there? And that's sort
Yes.
of like the different sides of perfectionism and people pleasing, high achieve. Like, there's such better ways to live and lead and love.
Mm. One of the things you mentioned on your website is that you're helping leaders drop the act and step into, let me bring it up. I've forgotten now. So
Mm.
you're helping them drop the act and make a bigger impact. Do you mind to walk us through that, please?
Yeah, of course. So I think we all know that we all wear masks at several
Mm.
times of our lives. So, how can we wear those masks a little bit less? There's a great saying by an American sociologist. This is back in the 1800s. And he put it beautifully. I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think that you think I am.
Oh, wow.
So basic
Yeah.
yeah, I know it's a bit of a discombobulation, but it
Mm.
basically means that we're all walking around hoping that we don't say or do something stupid because we're so worried about
Mm.
what the other people think of us. But the irony is they're worrying about what we think of them. So it's like this Abbott and Costello routine, like, "Are you thinking me? Oh, what do you think about? Are you
Yeah.
thinking me?" It's incredible the amount of time that we waste in our head. So here
Mm.
we are fearing the judgment and criticism of others, which I actually think in managed doses is a healthy thing. It keeps us humble. But I think what we have to recognize, especially to drop the act and make a bigger impact within an organization, is the judgment and criticism that we truly fear. And the one that is most debilitating is the stuff that we make up in our heads.
Mm.
And as a result, what happens, the more you worry about what people think of you, the more you're going to base your thoughts, feelings, and actions and behaviors on what you're predicting they're expecting you to say, expecting you to do. And when we talk
Mhm.
about things like innovation and creativity and leadership, how can we truly lead if we're trying to be someone else? That's not leadership.
Yeah.
That's actually
Mm-mm.
what a fraud is. And, when we delve into imposter syndrome and so forth, I think it's more of I don't actually agree with the concept of imposter syndrome because I think, especially women, we are smart enough to know that we are smart. I think the problem that we're truly facing is we're living our lives based on, have we said the right answer? Have we done the right thing? Please tell me that I've done that
Mm.
right. And the reason why we do that is because we don't know we're important. We
Mm.
think that other people are more important than us. We think your opinion is more important than my own. And the reason why we do this is because this is how we've been brought up. We've been
Yeah.
brought up to say, like, you know, you've already had your you've already had your turn. Let someone else go first. Oh, don't speak out of turn. Like, oh, don't talk about yourself so much. Like, be
Mhm.
humble. Let someone else have a turn. So we grow up thinking, well, I must not be that important. I need to base my life on what you think of me because your opinion is more important than my
Mm.
opinion. As a result, we wear these masks and it affects us when we're leading in an organization. So it's like we're just crumbling into one kind of identity, and it's problematic. I could go on and on and on.
Yeah, please do. I find it fascinating, and I guess my question is, do you help people kind of break down those masks and actually step into their true authenticity?
Yeah, like one of the questions I asked is, think of the first time that you were worried about what you said.
Mm.
Like, here's an example, and I still do this. I still do this, and I do this with my partner of all people. I think oftentimes you do it with people that you truly respect, right? So
Mm.
he'll say something like, "What do you think of this?" And I'll give him an answer. And it's like time just slows down because all I'm doing is waiting for him to say, "That's a good idea." So
Mm.
I don't think I have a good idea until he says, "Yes, that's a good idea." And the question is, why do we do that? Like, when's the first
Yeah.
time I remember doing that? And it's oftentimes with teachers, with coaches,
Mm.
because, when you're young and you grow up, and especially when you look up to teachers, those people that educate you want to have that right answer. You
Yeah, of
want to
course.
be student in the classroom. And I'm sure this has happened to you at one point where you're sitting in a classroom and the teacher says, "Does anyone know the answer?" And you're like, "Ooh, ooh, 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 I know the answer. I know the answer." And you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, but I can't say it because what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? Oh, I can't see the answer." And then someone else gives the right answer. And you're like, "Motherfucker, I had that answer."
Yes, it
So
has happened.
we don't speak up because we need to know the right answer. And so all of a
Mhm.
sudden we're wearing these masks and we can't make a great impact if we're staying silent all the
Yeah.
time. We need to be fallible. We need to screw up because that's when all the discoveries are made, especially not only in organizations, but I mean, you with the beautiful paintings in the background, like think about creativity, think about all the artists that have gone complete, like Picasso, for example. Like that is
Yeah.
just a trip. Like you think you're on
Totally.
acid looking at those photos.
Yeah.
He didn't follow the straight lines, right? And this is, I
No.
think, what we have to
Mm-mm.
do is drop the mask so we can actually show the world who we really are, because that's when the cool stuff happens.
Totally. And from my own experience, I think when you step outside your comfort zone, like even the podcast, for example, Universe spoke to me through three different people, decided to teach myself how to do it. Anyway, I just jumped on it and I've done it. And it's been one of the most rewarding experiences ever, connecting with people like yourself and just seeing the abundance that it's not only creating for myself and Design Studio Perth and the personal growth, but for everyone else as well. Like it's just been so enjoyable, which is great to see.
Mm. You remind me of, I was working with a coach, and it's funny. So what I was saying before is like you're waiting for them to
Mm.
say, "Oh, that's a good idea," right? And
Mhm.
she's very interesting because what she says, like, I'll tell her an answer, and I know exactly what she thinks within a millisecond because she has two different faces. She has the lean in, "Oh my God, tell me more," or she has the hmm contemplative
Right.
look. So I know.
Yeah.
But when it's a contemplative, I know exactly what she's gonna say, which is, "Tell me what you really think." And the reason why I say
Right.
this is because oftentimes, again, getting back to we're saying the answer that we think is right, but it doesn't mean that it's right for where you wanna go. You wanna think differently. People
Mm.
probably listen to your podcast because you give a different point of the world. And that's a scary thing to say, "I don't actually think this way, I think this way."
Yeah.
And because, oh my God, what if people don't agree? What if people don't like you? What if
Mhm.
you're insulting someone? God forbid.
Yes.
And so it's a scary thing to speak your mind. But the funny thing
Mm.
is, we listen to others when they speak their mind. You're like, "Oh, go girl. I
Yeah.
love it."
We encourage them, yes.
Yeah, but
Definitely.
we think we're gonna sound arrogant. We think we're gonna sound
Mm.
arrogant if we stay true to our word. So that's a whole other problem.
Mm. And I guess, Dr. Catherine, do you think anyone is truly ever themselves, or we constantly just kind of moving between those masks as we engage with different people in our lives?
I think what happens is there's a great Jay-Z quote, which I'm gonna get wrong, but it was a paraphrase here. Everyone wanted me to stay the same. But the whole point of life is to change. Like, I don't want to
Mm.
be the person that I used to be. And interestingly enough, I could be getting this wrong, but I believe the preface to that song is Jay-Z actually shot his brother. I think something like that, that his brother was stealing, da da da. Of course, he doesn't want to be that person anymore.
Yeah.
Of course, he wants to
No.
change.
Mm.
And so I think, to your point, like, are we ever ourselves? I think because we're constantly changing, or hopefully we're constantly changing. How do we really even answer that? Like, I think I think a question to really ask is, are we proud of who we are in any given
Yeah.
moment of time? And I think that's a really important thing, because I don't want to be the same person that I am yesterday, but does that mean that I'm not truly myself? I don't think we'll ever know that answer personally.
Yeah.
But
No, fair
my
enough.
dad, yeah, my dad often said, like, he never said, "I'm proud of you" to me ever. He always said, "I'm happy for you." And I never really quite understood this, but then I
Mm.
recognized that pride is something that we have to cultivate internally.
Mm.
Happiness is one thing, but the question is, when you think about who you are, does it make you happy? But happy is a bit challenging, because are you happy because everyone around you is happy? Are you people pleasing? Or are you proud
Mm.
of yourself? Because I think when you can say, "I'm actually proud of who I am," that means that you're proud of who you are no matter what people think of you. A
Mm.
massive,
That's
massive difference to that. Huge,
huge.
huge.
Mm.
Because it's like that saying, the standard you walk by is the standard that you accept. It's
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Like, you can walk by, but then you're not proud of yourself, or you can stand up, and that's pride. And that's, I think, when we start to shed the mask that we wear, and we're like, "This is me, take it or leave it," kind of thing, which I'm still
Mm.
working on. I just want to preface this by saying I still curl up. I have this white padded room in my head that I go to sometime, and I just like
Oh,
rock back and
you and
forth.
me
But
both.
when you're Oh, it's like, and it's always with strangers. Like, I'll walk by a stranger, like, you and I are dog walkers. Walk by someone, I
Yes.
always say hi, like, good
Same.
morning to people. And if someone doesn't say good morning to me, I feel like the worst person on earth, and I'm like, I will
Ah,
find that person. I'm like, "Why didn't you say good morning to me? Do you not like me?" It's ridiculous. It's so stupid. So I still
I'm
do
the
that.
same.
I'm a work in progress. Work in
Yeah, I
progress.
think we all are. I do the same on my run. So I usually like wave at someone or like you like run past and like high five and they leave me hanging and I'm like it's a stab in the heart and like kind of recoup after 2 minutes. But then I'm back in the swing of it. But yeah, it's interesting to see people's reactions and others with their whole face will light up and they'll like, give you a high five. And so it's not
Mhm.
everyone, but yes, it's when someone rejects you, it's just that stab in the heart. And then I
Oh,
run it off.
oh my god. Yes, totally. We
Yeah.
took it so personally even though we shouldn't, but
And Dr. Catherine, what advice would you have for someone who perhaps feels that they are holding back, they are fearful, of what others think? Because I was this person, and I think I'm about 80% there, still a work in progress. What advice would you give them, or what steps can they take to really, I guess, move past that? Or, is it a case of working on their mindset or starting a process to kind of, I guess, get a bit more like mentally stronger, I want to say?
yeah, no, no, great question. So I I think at the end of the day, we should care about the opinions of others. I think that still is
Mm,
important, but I think what we have to recognize is care about the opinions who have earned the right to have that opinion. Because
mm,
at the end of the day, the most important opinion you should have is the one that you have of yourself. So in any given moment, I'll give you an example. I was giving a keynote last
yeah.
night and out of the audience, I always vibe. There's always people in the audience that I just vibe with. Like I get their energy from. But on the same token, there's always people in the audience that they just have that stoic face and I don't know what they're thinking. And it's like this siren call. Like you want to look at them so badly because all you want to do is please and appease them, right? And
Mm,
so in that moment, the thing that I constantly say to myself is you could be the juiciest peach in the world, but some people just don't like peaches.
mm.
Meaning
True.
care about your opinion first. Are you proud of what you're saying? Even if you screw up, can you recognize that you have screwed up? You're fallible. Whose opinion should you care about the most? The opinion that you have of yourself. And in that moment, last night, of course, it wasn't like 100% perfect. The keynote, it will never be. So even
Mm,
in that moment where I screw up, you can either stay in that mindset and say, I might as well just walk away. I've made one word that's wrong, or you can say, this is something I need to work on. And I think
yeah.
that's the high achiever part of me. But, getting back to your point of like what people can do in any given moment, ask yourself the question, whose opinion do you care about the most? Do you care about the person that you're talking to, or do you care about your own opinion? Such a simple question,
Mm,
such a complex answer. And I think once you can recognize that, and especially recognize the people who you're wanting that opinion of, because there's always going to be differences. There's going to be
yeah.
that one person that you just, unless you get that validation, you can't move forward. Ask yourself why. Why is it that person?
Mhm.
So that's a tricky one, but really, and sometimes I think we feel boastful when we say, "Well, I should care about my opinion first." It almost
Mm,
feels arrogant, it almost feels boastful, but if you look at it objectively, it isn't. But I think we've been
mm,
raised again, getting back to how we've been raised to care more about the opinions of others than we are ourselves.
mm.
This is not to point fingers by any means, but I know, like, I learned that through my mom. My mom didn't really care about the opinions people had of me. My mom cared about the opinions people had of her based on the actions I was taking.
Right.
So in
Mm,
my mind, my calculation was, well, that must mean other people are more important than me,
mm.
right? So that's a whole complex world as well. And you would think as an adult, you look back and you're like, "Well, that makes sense," but it takes time to let those patterns go because your mindset, especially in complex situations, like, "No, no, this is the exception to the rule. Their opinion is much more important than your own."
Mm,
You talk your way out of it. So I think it's like this repeated care more about my opinion of myself rather than a person, a stranger, a dog walker who didn't say hi to me, who I will never see
mm.
again. Great
Yeah.
example.
Mm. And I guess in terms of like a tool, would you recommend someone like maybe journals it out? You know, how do I feel about myself? Because it's something we probably don't ever ask ourselves. Would you recommend that's a useful tool to kind of start this process?
Yeah, there's something called flow writing. It was first validated, I think, in the mid 1980s. Can't remember the psychologist, but basically what this is, you get a piece of paper, or I guess nowadays it would be your notepad on your iPad. You set a timer and you start with a prompt question. So usually it would be like, how does it feel to be me right now? Or it could be, why do I rely on the opinions of others and not my own? Set a timer, 5-10 minutes, and you write with no judgment, no criticism. So even if you make a spelling mistake, there instead of there, you don't cross it out. You just keep going.
Roll with
You
it.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah, you roll with it. You don't even really quite understand what you're writing. You just write. The way I would think about it is like sort of turning on taps of the water for five
Mhm.
minutes. You just let it flow out. The timer sounds, and you write one final statement. You close it, and then if you want, you can read it again, or you can just move on. You burn it. But what I would recommend or challenge people is reread it. Reread
Mm.
it with subjectivity on the shelf and objectivity at the forefront of your eyes. Read it like you were someone else. Be a detective. Try to
Mm.
understand. I wonder why I wrote that. Not like, is that right or wrong? I wonder.
Yeah.
Be
So
curious
curious.
about,
Mm.
and that, it's not perfect, but it does allow that criticism to be turned down a bit. And it's interesting when we write or when we speak our mind, knowing that no one else is going to read it. That's when the
Mm.
magic comes. Those secrets start to bubble to the surface. And you're like, oh my God, I,
Totally.
no idea that this was in there. It's like another fart. It's like a private
Yeah.
fart.
In your journal.
Yes. Farting in your journal.
Yeah, 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 and I journal every day, and just I guess the perspective one has, because you might write about something, for myself a couple of days in a row and just think, "Okay, I'll just leave it there," or I burn it, which is very therapeutic. But again, you might journal about the same thing a week later, and then you just get a whole 'nother perspective on things, because sometimes when we're in the jar, we can't see the label, and if I really find journaling helps me get it outside of my jar.
Absolutely. And the next step would be to talk to someone you know, like, and trust.
Mm,
But I would say someone that is distant enough because you don't want like a family member that thinks that you are God's gift to mankind because then they're just going to say what you want to say or
yeah.
so I found that in my life and it's interesting, in regards to therapy, I've worked with many therapists. I remember the first one that I worked with basically insulted me, said like, do you not
Oh,
realize that you've already told me that? Like, can we not move on? Yeah, I couldn't
wow.
believe that. That's when I was in the bowels of my eating disorder, and I was absolutely feeling disgusted. Another
My
one fell
goodness.
asleep on me, and this is people pleasing for you. The therapist fell asleep on me, and I said, "Oh, are you okay? Do you want to reschedule?" I was apologizing to her, like, "I'm so sorry that
Yeah.
you're tired." I'm
She fell asleep.
ridiculous.
Wow.
Yes. And then this one, when I was at the University, of Western Australia, there's actually a great clinic there. And it was like
Mm.
$30 an hour. And this guy who was like 6'5" bald dude that probably had no experience in eating disorders, we clicked.
Yeah.
We absolutely clicked, and he got every single ounce out of me. And I remember on our last session, because it's a university, there was like cameras, like they record the session so they can review it
Yeah.
afterwards, and that's why it's
Mm.
discounted. I said, like, I know you're not allowed to do this, but can I give you a hug? It
Yeah.
was magical. So it's
Wow.
trying to find that person that understands the way you think because I'll give you an example. He really thought out of the box. I need objectivity. So when it came to my binges, I wanted to see how that decrease was happening. So he said, "Well, why
Mm.
don't you graph it in Excel?" Because I'm like, "Oh, give me a good Excel spreadsheet, India. I'm a
Yeah.
happy girl." So I would actually graph my binges and I would
Mm.
show him statistically over time if they were reducing. And he just like very weird. But
Yeah.
he was like, I get it. And it helped. So the point being
Yes.
is that, the person who's trying to figure out why am I worrying so much about what people think of me rather than the
Mm.
the thoughts that I have of myself, some therapists will approach it in a very different way. And you just have to find what way works for you. What is that door that gets opened up to help you see yourself as you truly are? But you have to try many, 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 many doors to get there.
Definitely. And I guess you touched on something, for the person who might be on the receiving end of the person expressing themselves. I'm just thinking of the lady that fell asleep on you. I guess, how can someone hold that space for someone in a way that, let's kind of vent, but doesn't make them feel like an absolute, doesn't make them feel alone or feel like a fool in any way?
Yeah, I think we have 2 ears for a reason and only one mouth. So
Mm.
it's really difficult, especially, and I don't know how parents do this because parents know the answer to when their kid is going through a problem. But you could tell them the solution or they can fall and fumble their way to the solution. And I'm not preaching to the choir here. We are obviously know what the best way is, but it's
Mm.
really hard to hold back when you know the solution. Like, when your best friend or your family member is dating like someone who's just a friggin' jerk.
Yeah.
Can't say anything because the more you say,
Mm.
"Can you not see he's a friggin' jerk?" the more they're gonna push back and then you lose them. So
As they
it's really
do.
hard to just listen. It's really hard to
Mm.
listen and also mirror. So I did my postgrad in counseling, and there's so many things, beautiful things and techniques I learned. But one of the things that I love the most is rather than mirroring back or saying back what they just said, can you find a metaphor to help
Mm.
them package up what they just said? An example could be, oh, I feel like, my entire day I'm just getting the kids ready for school and then I have to go take care of my mom and then I have to, look at my emails and then there's this person at work that needs help. I feel like I'm just losing control of my life. So what I would say back to them, it's kind of sounds to me that like you're holding a fish that you just caught, but it's wriggling and you just can't get a hold of it.
Mm.
Does that make sense to you? And they're like, "Oh my god, yes.
Yeah.
It's like this slippery fish that I'm trying to concentrate on just keeping it." And that works for them
Mm.
because then
Yeah.
they have that picture in their mind to summarize what they're going through. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Because it's
It does, it's
basically saying,
powerful.
"Here's
Mhm.
yeah, here's all the shit that I'm dealing with. Can we put it into
Mm.
one little box so I can better understand it and sort of hold it and look at it from all different shapes and, sides?"
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's a really powerful tool, I think.
Mm. Yeah, works for me. I love metaphors though. I'm like absolutely mad when it comes to metaphors. I think they're so powerful because our brains really work in images.
Mm.
As they say, a picture says 1,000 words. Like, how can we get someone's problems into a picture so they have that like snapshot in their mind to sort of look at objectively?
And I guess sort of process things a bit more easier as well, not trying to have like 10 different things happening all at once because that can be very overwhelming.
Yeah. Oh my god. Oh
And
my god.
yeah. And Dr. Catherine, I'd love to know in your own, I guess, personal journey and business journey, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced and how have you navigated through those?
Oh, I would say the biggest challenge I face is allowing my journey to be dictated by someone else or what I thought someone else wanted for me. Um, when I was a kid, all I wanted to do is be a pastry chef. That's all I wanted to do.
Mm.
Like, from a young age, I had the magic oven, where it's like a little
Cool.
plastic box with a light bulb and
Yes.
you would put like I loved it. I remember my grandpa got it for me. I was like, I'm like in arts and crafts heaven. And 6, I started doing the Betty Crocker cakes, and then when I was, like, 8 and 9, I started watching cooking shows instead of cartoons, and I just adored it, and it's interesting when I was, like, 13, 14, that's when my disordered eating started because in my high school, anorexia was cool, like, it was literally popular, so the goal was to eat so little that you fainted. So all of a sudden, I was this person that could not love life anymore in the kitchen, but I
Mm.
allowed this popularity contest to take away the magic in my life. So that was the first example of how we allow basically the thoughts and opinions of others to influence our own life path. But the thing is,
Yeah.
this is imagine, right? We allow, the way I explain it is we allow our imagination to dictate our destination.
Mm.
And
Very true.
it's, when it comes to criticism, I mean, that's not the right way forward. And then ended up going to university. I did like business 101, no interest whatsoever. But I started working in a restaurant when I was 18. The pastry chef suddenly left, and they were like, "Oh, do you want to be a pastry chef?" And I was like, "Does it bear shit in the woods? Of course, I want to be a
Of
pastry chef."
course.
So at
Yeah.
18, I was the pastry chef of one of Toronto's most famous restaurants at the time. Like it was such
Right.
an incredible experience. And during film festival, we had like Michael Jordan and Cher and Demi Moore, and it was like magical. I grew up very
So cool.
quickly. But then I remember my girlfriend brought in one of her buddies to the restaurant, and I was 18, he was 36. And he said, like, "Well, what's your dream?" I said, "My dream is to open up a restaurant one day." And I had got into a very coveted culinary school. It was called the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America.
Mm.
Got in, and he said, "Well, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just open a restaurant tomorrow?" Who do you think I listened to? Him, because I
Hmm.
validated his opinion. So I ended up
Yes.
spending the next 5 years with him. I opened up a restaurant catering business, no knowledge whatsoever, went bankrupt for $250,000. So
Wow.
again, another example when we don't trust our gut.
Mm.
We listen to the opinions of others. We listen to the loud voices of others rather than listening to that whisper in our heads. And it's the whisper in our brains that we should be listening to, not the loud voices of others. So, just two examples of what could be many other examples. But the thing is, I think sometimes you have to go through that too. I had to, unfortunately, I don't learn that quickly. I think I'm a bit dense in the head in this way that I
Oh,
had to let that happen like 300 times. Like, when are you going to learn to trust your own gut? But I
oh.
think practice makes perfect. Yeah.
I am exactly the same. I tend to have a lot of blood noses and don't learn, but I think like you said, every experience that has landed up with a blood nose has helped me become who I'm becoming along the way. So I do not think you're dense in any way. I think it's only natural and human, and I'm exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but I could think all those experiences again, to the soup analogy, it gets sort of
Yes.
thrown in the pot. But sometimes when you're in that situation, you're just thinking, is life ever going to get better? Like, is
Mhm.
life ever going to get easier? And it's, it kind of feels like you're in quicksand. Or the way I
Mm.
actually used to explain it in Canada, it's sort of hard in Australia to visualize black ice, but the slipperiest of ice. And I say, life sometimes feels like you're in 5-inch heels running backwards on black ice.
Yeah,
Like you
it
just
does.
feel like, am I ever going to be in control? Because you just keep
Mm.
on slipping and sliding and teetering and tottering. And you're like, is it ever going to be easier? And oftentimes we think, are we being punished? Like, are
Mm.
we a bad person for this to be happening to us because, quote unquote, other people have it so much easier? So then I used to literally think I must be a bad person. I must be,
Yeah.
I'm not religious, but like God's magnifying glass, like an ant in the magnifying glass. Like,
Yeah.
why me? Why me?
Mm.
Why me? And
Mm.
unfortunately, this is another lesson that took me a long time to learn is the more you say, why me? The more prolonged the process is to get in
Mm.
control because it's so wonderfully comfortable to point outwards and blame the world. It is
Yeah.
so difficult to say, "Hmm, maybe it's something that I'm doing." And I actually learned that when I was 32 years old. I came here to Australia and I had this knack for dating the wrong guys.
Oh,
And it was
I
like
had the same.
over yeah, over and over and over again, and I had this buddy, and, after yet another failed breakup because I was, like, a professional stage 5 clinger. Like, if you look up the definition of stage 5, you're gonna see my smiling face in the
Oh,
dictionary.
right.
And I was bawling. I was like, woe is me. Why am I so unlucky? And this guy had no
Mm.
filter whatsoever. And he turned to me and said, do you not realize that you're the common denominator for all these bad relationships? And
Mm.
it's kind of like, the movies where someone gets punched, but in slow motion.
Yes.
That's what it felt. It felt like someone was punching me in the gut. And the reason why it hurt so much is because it was true. But of course, it
Yeah.
was so much easier to say, it must be the guys. Why am I so
Mm.
unlucky? Why am I the only person that deals with that? It's so hard to look in the mirror and say, you got to
It
do
is.
some shitload of work on yourself because you are
Mm.
effed in the head. And you got to sort that out.
Yeah, and it's
But
brave as well and terrifying at the same time.
it's hard to admit that you're a problem. Because,
Mm.
when you're a kid, you don't wanna be the problem child, right?
No, no,
And
not at
you don't
all.
wanna be that weird person that people talk around like the water cooler, you know,
Mm.
"Oh, did you see what Catherine did? Like, oh my god, how did she not" like, you don't wanna be that person that people talk about. You don't wanna be the weirdo. You don't wanna be like the
No,
screwed up one, like, "Oh my god, you don't. But, once you
no,
realize that you can improve yourself and it's in your control, that's when it gets a little bit easier.
definitely. And while you were speaking about school earlier, I was actually reflecting. So they used to have this system where you got like merits and demerits. If you did well in a test, you get like a merit, of course, because I'm exactly like you, perfectionist, high, I'm extremely driven to the next level. And the one day I got a demerit for talking in class and I was mortified. Like destroyed. It was grade 2. And obviously looking back, you realize how inconsequential that was. But I was in tears. I was devastated because I was like, what are my parents going to think? The only demerit I ever got in my whole primary school life, but I was mortified. And it came from a teacher that was like one of my favorites. So yeah, I don't know why I was reflecting about that. But anyway.
But it would be interesting to like imagine if that same story happened with a teacher that you didn't like. I wonder how that would have been different for you because you actually really like this teacher.
It might have been easier had I not liked her, but because I absolutely loved her and all that, and like I said, it was the first demerit ever, I was just absolutely beside myself.
It's like,
Uh,
when you're getting in trouble with your parents, and I'm 46 and I still feel like I get in trouble with my parents, but what we're really scared of is them saying, I'm so disappointed in you.
Mhm.
And getting back to the example of your teacher, would you not say that when you respect someone, having them say, I'm disappointed in you, versus a teacher that you don't respect saying, you screwed up? I would say the first one is a heck of a lot worse than the second one because what
Definitely.
we hear is, I'm disappointed in you, is I don't love you.
So true.
Versus the other one, you can more clearly see it's not you as a person, it's what you've done. Whereas in
Mm.
the first one, I think we take it like it is us. Like for example, with if you're overweight and you're very conscious about that, you can't separate the fact that the weight that you have is not you. Or like for
Mm.
example, if you have acne, if you have a zit, your mind says, well, I have a zit and zits are disgusting. And because I have
Mm.
a zit, that must mean I'm disgusting. So we take
Yeah.
this tiny little, you know, messy cells and we say our entire being is messy.
Mm. Is affected by it.
It just
Yeah.
yeah, so I think it's especially, yeah, when we conflate two things, it's really hard.
Mm. And Dr. Katherine, I guess along your journey, what has been some of the bravest things that you've done and, stepping outside your comfort zone?
I It's funny, this question always throws me because and I'm sure I'm guessing that you might feel similarly in the sense that you don't think what you've done is brave. You just think
Mm.
it's like, "Yeah, whatevs."
Normal. Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think when I was 16, again, because I was so desperate to be in relationships because I didn't feel like I was worthy unless I was having someone say, "Oh, you're worthy of my
Mm.
attention." And this was after I moved to Rome, Italy. Again, I was 16 at the time. And the reason why is because I got into drugs and I was, high at school. And then I started dealing drugs and then I got caught stealing. So extremely long story short, my mom, my
Mm.
stepdad, and I moved to Rome. And I started dating this guy, and he it's funny when you're 16, you don't wanna call someone an asshole, but he was an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and I remember he hit me, when we were in, like, this little alcove at school, right where, the pigeonholes are where you put your
Yes.
homework and you get your assignments
Mm.
back. I remember it vividly. And there was
Yeah.
a whole bunch of students around, but he hit me so hard that I fell over and my face hit the beautiful marble floor. All I can remember is this
Oh,
gorgeous marble floor. It was really, really
yes.
pretty. But I hit
Yeah.
the marble floor, and
Mm.
I remember no one said anything. It was just sort of like, hush, hush, we didn't see anything. And
Wow.
I remember the next day, my face started just going like yellow, green, and brown, like on that one side. And I remember my best friend saying to me, like, you know, what happened? And I just didn't want to talk about it. And he kept on saying, no, tell me what happened. And I
Mm.
kept on shrugging it off. No big deal, no big deal. So there were people that were caring for me, but I didn't want to
Yeah.
let them in. And I
Yeah.
remember
Which is
after the
what we do
second
sometimes.
time, yeah, of
Mm.
course, because, we don't feel like we're worth anything. So why would someone, spend their energy on us? And I remember after
Mm.
the second time it happened, this was, I think, a month or two later, there was something in my head that just said, nah, this ain't right. And
Yeah.
I remember I was at the subway at the entrance, and it's funny what you remember. And he was
Mm.
going on the subway and he was like, come back to my place. And I said, nope. And I
Yeah.
remember literally not even saying, I just walked away. And to this day, I don't know what was inside me because at the time that was so unlike me. But there's
Mm.
just something in my body saying this ain't right. And I
Mm.
remember after that, my friends, I was in a group of guys, like I had no girlfriends, it was just guys. And I remember, like metaphorically, they surrounded me for months,
Mm.
months. You were just like this armor around me. And I'd never felt so loved in my life.
Mhm.
It's amazing that when you look for love in one path and then something tells you that it's not right, you actually find true love through
Yes.
friendship.
Mm.
It was magical. Magical. I can't, yeah, I'm tears in my eyes, like
I know.
magical.
You're making me, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm goosebumping, like, everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. To this day, I remember those friends. Yeah, it was beautiful. It was beautiful, and I'm sure I've done other things like that, but that was the one this is 30 years ago that I vividly remember the most, and I was so
Wow.
proud of myself. So proud of myself.
Yeah. And another thing I think you've done so brilliantly, Dr. Katherine, is your personal brand. You've nailed it. Like being in the branding space, your photos, your messaging, like everything. I am proud of your branding. It's awesome.
Mm. I love being in front of the camera. Let me give you the tip. If someone asked me to do a photo shoot, I'm like, where do you need me to be and when? I love that part. But I have to say, like, this has been through a lot of help through a lot of people because I think sometimes I think you said it perfectly. You can't see the label if you're inside the bottle. Like you don't
Mm.
know what makes you you. And I
No.
think, people like you and people within the space have this magical eye to extract. And I think what I mentioned before about the coach that I work with is she doesn't she doesn't take you like as in what you see on the outside. She like rips you open,
Yeah.
extracts all the blood and guts and gore and everything like this and makes it a beautiful mess. And I think I'm very grateful for the people who have helped me do that.
Yeah. And, I know in terms of, having a brand and a personal brand, it's one of those things that it can be so terrifying putting yourself out there. And a lot of our clients struggle with the idea of, even creating a personal brand or, because it's completely outside their comfort zone. But again, it's really great to see how you're leveraging that. And your Instagram and your videos, such true authenticity. Like I binged on all of them.
A lot of fun. They do take a lot. I'm on a social media break at this time, but they are fun, and especially I do these characters like one I have myself as a high achiever and myself
Yeah.
again as a people pleaser and myself again as self-respect. And I think to your point of like I had this idea for such a long time, but I was like are people going to understand it? And you just sort of do it. And people are like, oh my God, you know exactly what's going on in my head. And
So
I
good.
remember opening a keynote with those characters, and I did it and this was the first time people clapped after the introduction, because I had
Oh,
about a 1.5 minute introduction with this sort of staged acting. I was like, this can go one or two ways. And they clapped. And it was in that moment, it was like 46 years of my imagination culminating into that 1.5 minutes. And I think even if they didn't love it, I was like, fuck, that was good.
yeah.
I nailed it.
That's great.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
very that's another proud actually another brave moment is just to do, because it's corporate people, right? You think
Yeah.
corporate people are corporates, but you don't
Yes.
we don't realize they're just people. They fart just like we do. They have problems
Yeah.
just like we do. And yeah, so that was
100%.
another magical experience. And I wouldn't have done that without really understanding who I was if I didn't do personal branding. It's such a
Mm.
magical thing. And I think I don't think even you need to be in business or, have a service or anything like that to have a personal brand. I think it's almost like therapy, visual therapy, like in a way, because I
Yeah.
think brands help you see. I think what I was saying before, when you see yourself in a picture, you
Mm.
start to understand who you are. So I think whether you're a vice president in a company or, you're just a junior in a company, I think getting personal branding done. And by the way, for the people listening, I'm not trying to sell here. I'm just speaking from experiences. Having someone help you see who you are gives you
Mm.
such incredible amounts of confidence, because then you're like, I see who I am and now I know how I'm presenting to the world. And you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
I got me. It's such a
Yeah.
great experience.
Thank you for sharing that. Again, I realized you weren't selling, but you took the words out of my mouth. It's and that's why I love the branding space, because just seeing someone who is so fixated on this idea that they need to stay under the radar, they are not worthy of stepping into the light, and somehow I managed to speak some sense into them, and they then step out and they just have the confidence, and just seeing that person's confidence grow is one of the most rewarding things of what I do in the space.
Yeah, it's magical, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
you're helping someone see what you see in them.
Mm.
It's literally like, "Oh, I didn't know that about myself. I didn't know that that's my." It's almost like a unique selling point, but not a selling point. It's like this
Yeah.
unique value that you can give to the world, but you have it in like this tangible word and visual.
Mhm.
It
Yes,
just
as
makes
well.
sense. It makes things organized. That's what I think. I think it just organizes your brain. That's what I
Yeah.
think.
Dr. Catherine, something you touched on earlier was self-worth. And I think this is something I've been working on for the last, 2 years. And I think a lot of women in particular and guys really struggle with their self-worth. They put everyone else first. They, undermine themselves, don't ever, take that trip or go for that facial. What would be some advice you'd give that person who perhaps is always putting everyone else first, who doesn't think they're worthy of, taking $100 and having a facial, whatever the case may be? What advice would you give that person?
I think one thing to consider is that when you're putting yourself first, you're not putting everyone else last. But
Mm.
in our heads, we think that way. We think that if we take an hour out of our time and $100 to go have the experience of a lifetime, that means we are taking away that experience from others,
Mm.
if that makes sense. Like we
It does.
think it's almost like by, I don't want to say pleasuring yourself, but hey, if that's how you want to take care of yourself, you go,
We'll roll
girl.
with it.
But yeah, like by pleasuring ourselves, we're punishing others,
Yeah.
because we should be thinking about them first. We should be selfless. And I
Mm.
think as a result, we think the opposite of selflessness is selfishness, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So
It
it's like this
does.
all or none thinking. Like if we're not being selfless, that must mean we're selfish. But I think we have to
Mm.
re-look at what being selfish actually is. And I think this, getting back to the high achieving people pleaser, one of the things that I've seen repeatedly, not only within my own mind, but speaking to many people like you and other high achieving people pleasers, is that they can't make the difference between the two.
Mm.
So I think I call it healthy selfishness. So healthy selfishness is actually when you think you're being selfish, but actually you're just being a normal, healthy, self-respecting human being. I'll give you an example, very benign example. So when I go out to a restaurant, my partner and I, we love steak, right? And if I get a steak and let's say it's really undercooked, really,
Mm.
really undercooked, I won't send it back because I think that's selfish because I think by sending it back, I'm gonna ruin the chef's day. So
Mm.
I would rather get food poisoning and end up in the hospital rather than what is happening in my imagination that I'm gonna ruin a chef's day and he's gonna hate me.
Mm.
Like, is that normal? No, it is not. We have to realize, like,
Mm-mm.
that is not normal, and so what I think in my mind is if I say, "Oh, excuse me, I'm just wondering, could I get this cooked a bit more? Is that okay?"
Mm.
We That's being selfish. That's actually just being self-respecting.
Mm.
We have to start looking at what we think is selfish and start to really ask ourselves, "Is that selfish or is that just healthy?" But
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable. Or another example is obviously we email a lot as businesswomen. So one of the things that I notice is I'll say, "I'm just checking in,"
Mm.
but I'm not just checking in. I'm checking in. The
Yeah.
use of the word just is incredible.
Mhm.
Uh, Even if, as a people pleaser, if you just start taking that word just out of your emails, you will see a significant difference, but it's so scary. And usually, what you do is you say, "I'm checking in," and then you're like, "I need to compensate by adding a smiley face."
Yeah.
You know?
It's so true. I'm laughing because 'cause I've done it.
Totally. Because we want the other person to know how we're writing the email, like the mood
Mm.
that we're in.
Yeah.
Whereas likely they're not thinking about that. They're just glad that we're checking in. So it's these small
Totally.
benign things that I think we should start with. So if you can't make the
Mm.
leap to spending an afternoon at the spa and spending that money on yourself, just start looking for these little ways for you
Yeah.
to you know, by doing these things is you're not disrespecting others, you're just showing that you have
Mm.
respect for yourself.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between that. There's a big difference by writing those emails and showing that you know your worth.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. It's really as simple as that.
Thank you so much for sharing, especially with that just word. My advisor said the same. Like, if you just remove that word just, another one is trying, because we're like, oh, I'm just trying. Well, it's like you're either doing something or you're not. Like, there's no in between. Like, you either, you're on that run or you sitting at home. Like, there's no gray area. So, and we don't realize how powerful those words like just or trying can actually be.
Mhm. Do or do not, there is no try. The
Yes,
famous Yoda from Star Wars. Do or
that's
do
probably where
not.
it's from.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it is.
And Dr. Catherine, are you still do you still bake, and are you still your pastry chef in some way or capacity?
I do pretty much every weekend, and so my stepdaughter has a boyfriend. She just had her 4 months anniversary. It's
Oh,
so
cute.
cute,
Nice.
and her boyfriend loves to eat. So now he's gotten into this pattern of saying like, "Oh, so I'll see you for Sunday night dinner." And so he's always expecting like a dessert, and my partner has like a bottomless stomach. So they're like, "Oh, so what are you gonna be baking this week?"
I
So
look forward
I
to
get a
it.
lot of pleasure out of it because then I can, go back to my roots and sort of challenge things. It doesn't always
Yeah.
work out, but most of the time it does. It really
Yes.
does. So it's very relaxing for me to be in the kitchen.
Oh, great. It's nice that it's still a part of your life as well.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And always take things, to the office that I work out of. And everyone's like, please, please, no, don't bring any more. But then secretly thinking, so what are you going to make next week?
Yeah. And would you ever go into that space in like a business sense again?
I would love to. I mean, gosh, there's so many things I would love to do. I'd love to start a shoe line. I would love to,
Oh,
learn
yes,
more about
please.
sewing and couture. But I would love to. One of my partner and I's dream is to start a private club, like a very, very unique private club,
Cool.
because we're hoping to move to Dubai next year. So who knows? Who knows what the future may hold? But right now, I just love being on stages. I love
Yeah.
picking what shoes I'm gonna wear and wearing them on stage and speaking my heart out.
Yeah. And before we sign off, Dr. Catherine, I'd love to know if you could go back, what is the one bit of advice that you would give your 16-year-old self?
People aren't thinking about you.
Mm.
And here, I'll give you actually like a factual example of this. So when I was 16 years old, I remember coming back to my locker and someone had written the word slut on it. And at the time, because parents had got divorced and I was just desperate for attention, I was trying to find this
Mhm.
attention through guys. So yes, did I go through many relationships? Absolutely. Did it
Yeah.
warrant someone writing slut? The answer is absolutely no. And that was sort of like the I would say, like, what I was going through in a nutshell is like just caring so much what people thought of me and using that as a label for myself.
Mm.
I just thought everyone else spent 24/7 thinking bad thoughts of me. I honestly thought that was it. So and nowadays
Mm.
it's even worse because, social media. But then I was like, I went home. Oh, John must be thinking of me. Willie must be thinking of me.
Yeah.
Many years later, we're talking, this is like 25, 30 years later, I connected with this girl I knew from high school during that
Mm.
time. And she had seen a post about talking about this and just like worrying about what people think. And she said, I'm so sorry that I didn't reach out because I was worrying about what everyone else was thinking of me.
Oh, so she was in the same boat. Yeah.
Exactly same boat. And
Wow.
I would hypothesize that she isn't the only one. So
Mm.
we think people are thinking bad thoughts about us all the time. Like the dog walker example. I
Mm.
think he's going to go home and he's just going to sit on the couch and say, "Oh, that short Canadian bitch, I'm just going to get her. She's like the evil." Not
Mm.
thinking of me because he's probably thinking about all this shit that he has to deal with. So I
Mm.
wish I could go back and say, no one is thinking about you. So start
Yeah.
thinking about yourself. Stop thinking
Yeah.
about what they have to think about because they're not thinking of you because they're worrying
No,
about what but we think we're the center of everyone's universe.
we
We
do.
think we're that ant under the microscope or
Mm.
whatever you call it, the magnifying
Yeah.
glass. We're not. We're
No.
not. That's one
Mm.
time we need to put our egos aside.
Totally. And I think even a lot of business owners as adults are still like that as well. And I mean, I absolutely love it when someone will phone me and they'll share, I'm glad that they trust me, that they'll share, an issue they're having or a problem, because again, it just shows that you're human. We're all human. We all have a lot of shit going on. And if we can
Mhm.
support each other, there's that saying that it's lonely at the top, but I believe we need to be there for each other at the top and really hold space for each other to facilitate that growth in order to achieve our next goals. So
Agreed. Couldn't have said it better.
Dr. Catherine, thank you so much for your time. Where is the best place for our listeners to go should they wish to connect with you?
Probably 2 places. First, Instagram. I'll be back on there after my social media hiatus soon, but great place to go just for 30, 60-second videos, just to hopefully give you that message that you might just have to hear that day to switch your mindset. And then the other place is, please feel more than welcome to send me a message through my website at drkatherine.com.
Thank you so much. We'll pop the links in the show notes. And I'd love to know, why are we having a social media break?
Uh, it just got draining. Like, to be honest, it was just draining. Like, I would
It
go on
is.
there, and especially with the US presidential elections, it's just a cesspool.
Mm.
It's a
Yeah.
cesspool, and I think just sometimes I'm just not strong enough to just I just get drained. And I'm like, "You know
Mm.
what? My life is worth so much more than that."
Yeah. And preserve your energy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I just need a break from everything, just like I need a break from high heels sometimes.
Yes. You and me both. Thank you so much for all that you shared. And thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you very much.
Take care.